Hello and welcome to another edition of the Bleeding Cool's Weekly Book Club. This week we are joined by Michael Moreci and Chase Magnett. They're joining myself, David Dissanayaka, and Sam Morse, who is our new regular co-host on this show. First of all, why don't we go through, before we talk about Black Science by Rick Remender and Matteo Scalera, I'm going to go through and let our new guests tell us a little bit about themselves. Michael, you are working on a new book that should be coming out next week, right?
Yeah, week from today, yeah, the 24th, Roche Limit.
That's
Awesome.
exciting.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, yeah.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about it.
Sure, yeah, that's probably a good idea. So I should have naturally segued into that, but so Roche Limit is it's a sci-fi book that I'm doing with Image, and it's basically about like this colony. So a few years from now, it's kind of we don't really clarify, we don't say like 75 years or 100 years or whatever, but in the future, mankind finds this semi-habitable planet on the cusp of this strange space anomaly, and the planet is habitable, and what happens is they set up this colony. It's called the Roche Limit Colony, and things just go really, really terribly bad. Instead of being like this like waypoint for further exploration and science and advance and discovering new life and all these wonderfully exciting things that you'd hope for in space and this new frontier, basically like humanity just brings all this bullshit with it, and on this colony it just denigrates to crime and lawlessness and social problems, and it's a weird thing. I remember reading this interview with Mike Judge, who's done so many great things, and he did Idiocracy, and he had this great quote about the movie where he talks about, I see all these futuristic movies where, there's great advances in technology and healthcare and science, all these things. He's like, I just don't know what they're basing that off of, and I think that's part of like what Roche Limit kind of taps into, is this idea of like, if we did find this new planet, if we did make a significant leap in space technology and advancement, what makes us think that we would find some sort of utopia or do something really great and significant with it, as opposed to just a continuation of Earth's shitty problems just somewhere else now. It centers around. Basically, it centers around what kickstarts the plot is this woman comes to Roche Limit. She's a cop on Earth, and she comes to Roche Limit to find her missing sister, and she gets tangled up with this collection of underworld figures, and through her and this guy Alex, who's a drug dealer and manufacturer, they are searching the underworld and finding answers, and they uncover more than they ever could have bargained for. And while they're searching for the girl Becca, her sister.
Awesome.
So it's a happy book, I would say.
Who are you working with on that?
It's the artist is wonderful. Vic Malhotra, who I can't say enough good things about. He had previously done a Thumbprint, an IDW book with Joe Hill, and he's doing an X-Files book. I think it's like an X-Files like flashback book, like 1960s or something like that. X-Files. He's told me, and I forget. But he's absolutely fantastic. He's done such great work on it. And Jordan Boyd is doing the colors, who seems to be coloring everything. I don't know who's with the name Jordan. Jordan Valeri and Jordan Boyd seem to be coloring all the books right now. And he's doing a wonderful job. Yeah, they he's doing a great job. They're both doing a great job. Ryan Ferrier does letters, and Tim Daniel is doing like the design and layout and everything like that. So I'm fortunate. I have a really good team.
How long do you see Roach Limit going on for? What are your plans for this series?
Well, it's something a little bit different that I'm doing. It's going to be a trilogy. So there's 3 5-issue arcs. So 15 issues total. There might be at some point, if I get into the second arc and I decide, it's not that well mapped out. I wish it were, but it might be like 6 issues instead of 5, so it might be like 16 or 17 issues, something like that. But that'll be it. It's a trilogy, and I know exactly where it's going and what I want to do with it. But once that's over, then that'll pretty much be it for the story.
Mm-hmm. Is it Vic going to be on the whole run with you?
Yeah, which is great. Him and I have had so many talks about where the book is going, and he's contributed a lot to that vision as well. So yeah, he'll be contributing through the very bitter end, which is great, and hopefully Jordan and Ryan and Tim as well. It would be great to have a consistent team through. That's the one thing. I mean, 15 issues sounds like a lot, and it is a lot in a way, but it's also not an indefinite ongoing where you can commit to it and see the finish line in sight, which is good, which I think will help maintain that consistency.
What's it like working with Image? Just curious a little bit there.
Image is great. I mean, this is my third go around. This is my third thing I'm doing with them, and I've had nothing but wonderful things to say. I mean, they give you great creative freedom. They let you kind of make your own destiny in a sense, and while supporting you a lot and giving you great resources. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to find anybody who beats Image in terms of like letting you make your own failures and make your own failures. Oh shit! Well, we'll see next week. Make your own 6. What's that?
I was just gonna ask. You started in the backups for Hack Slash, right?
Yeah, that was about like 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago. Yeah, 3-4 years ago, something like that. Yeah, Hoax Hunter started as the backup in Hack Slash because our buddies with Tim Seeley, and he needed he needed backup, and we were out drinking one night, and I was like, I'll do it, and he needed like 3 weeks later, and Hoax Hunters was born really quick, and then Hoax Hunters became a series, and then I just wrote with Tim's brother Steve. We wrote a Hack Slash miniseries, one of a few miniseries that'll be out, and then now Roche Limit, and yeah, Image is great. They've always been wonderful to me, and yeah, I mean they do so much to I mean, you guys know, to further comics in general, to diversify, to get new voices, new stories, and yeah, I mean they're really wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any other projects that you're working on?
I'm doing I have a few Dynamite books that haven't been announced yet, so I guess I can't. Yeah, I better not. But I'm writing a Dawn of the Planet of the Apes series, which is like
awesome.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'm a huge Planet of the Apes fan.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, I mean the old and the new stuff. I mean they're both terrific in their own ways. And so yeah, basically this is a comic series that's gonna bridge Rise of the Planet of the Apes to Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. It's like the 8 years between those two movies.
Mm-hmm.
And it's with Dan McGade, who's awesome. His art has just been fantastic on it. He's such a great artist.
What else has he done? I don't recognize his name.
Actually, I'm not even sure. He's one of those guys I see on Twitter a lot, posting like pinups, and that's how I knew him. And funny enough, I was about to ask him if he wanted to collaborate on an Image project that I wanted to do, and then he got the Planet of the Apes job. So I've seen a lot more of his stuff through there.
Mm-hmm. Cool. It's exciting. I'm looking forward to it, man.
Oh, well, thanks, guys. Yeah, I appreciate it.
All right. So, Chase, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
All right. My name is Chase Magnett. I live in Omaha, Nebraska, and I'm currently doing analysis and criticism for comicbook.com with Jim Viscardi and Comics Bulletin with Jason Sachs.
Cool.
I'm also editing a few small projects on the side. Anywhere Man, which is an indie book out of Omaha here with Jeff Lawler and Tim Mayer, and hopefully putting together Omaha's first comic convention next summer.
Nice.
I'm definitely not the lead on that, but I'm helping to bring in talent. So
that's
cool.
awesome.
That's And you work at a comic shop too, don't you?
I don't work at a comic shop. I might as well as much time as I spend there. But yeah, I met a couple of you guys at the Eisners this summer when I went and I accepted the Spirit of Retail Award for Legend Comics and Coffee here in Omaha.
Oh, pretty.
I'm friends with the owners and manager, and when they knew I was going out, we've got a pretty good relationship. So they asked me if I'd be willing to potentially accept it for them if they won, and they did. So that was a really cool experience.
Yeah, dude, you get to accept an Eisner, man. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I've interacted with the owners of the shop, and they're really super nice people. They're really great.
They're the best people.
Mm-hmm. Now it's like a comic shop cafe. Is that how it works?
Yeah, it's this little small brick storefront. It's a little historical location in Omaha, and they split it with a cafe called J. Coco. So what they have is a split level where half of it's comics and the other half is a coffee store. And I was just talking about it last week. They've been surprised by the number of people that come in looking for a good coffee store and then get into comics. They found a lot of their comic space they brought with them don't really get into the coffee, but they've been able to attract a lot of people from the other side over.
Nice.
That's really interesting. Are you allowed to take comics up to the cafe and like?
Yeah, they actually have a few shelves right next to where you check out on the cafe filled with books that they either have for half off. Some of them are used, some of them are just overstock, and they're all half off, and you can just pick them up, read them if you're going for coffee or just hanging out waiting for someone. And if you end up buying them, great. If not, then you had a little bit of reading material while you were there.
Nice. That's a great model. I really
it's the thing I love about Legend is that it's very much about growing comics. It's not about, oh, these are our guys and we're serving this very specific market. It's all about getting young kids into comics and getting people who have lapsed and getting the local college crowd at UNO into comics. It's a very, very approachable store. It's a beautiful storefront, really well maintained, and it has a great staff. So you've seen it grow year after year, and it's really cool to see that community continue to expand.
Nice. Mike, what's your LCS look like?
It's fortunate that I live in Chicago, and you can't throw a rock without hitting a comic store around here, which is cool, which is great. But I mean, I usually go to there's two that are Oh Yeah Comics and Skokie, which is near where I work, and they're great. That's run by Baltzar and Franco.
Is it really?
Yeah. Those guys own it, and a guy Mark operates it. But so Franco is in New York, so he's not there too often. But Art's there pretty often, so you can bump into him, and he's just a ball of wonderful energy, and such a nice guy. And so I usually go there, and I also go to Challengers, which is near my house. I moved a little bit further away, but yeah, they're a great shop as well. They've been close in the Eisner. Actually, they won it last year, but the year before Legend won, they had won. And yeah, those are great guys, Pat and Dale. They're really great.
Awesome.
Nice. Oh yeah.
Well, I think maybe we should get into talking about Black Science. That's what we're going to be talking about this week. It's by Matteo Scalera and Rick Remender, with colors by Dean White. And it's this wasn't my pick, but I'm pretty glad that we read it. I'd kind of missed out on the boat for it, and it was really great to catch up. But getting through this first trade, this volume 1, the first 6 issues, it wasn't a breeze to read, but I think that was the point. And so I guess before we get into the nitty gritty, Michael, what did you think of the book and the world building and the themes that it raised?
Oh man, I love this book, man. I'm a huge Remender fan.
Yeah.
I think ROCHE Limit is kind of like wearing a little Remender on my sleeve in a way, and I think this is one of his. It's hard to say one of his best. I mean, he does so many good things. I mean, Deadly Class is also. Have you read that, Sam? You were like.
I'm sorry. Yeah, that was just subconscious. I love Deadly Class.
Me too.
It's so fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. All 3 of his books right now are just off the hook, man. He's killing it.
Yeah, he's going nuts right now, man, which is great. He's just spectacular. And I don't know how he'll ever top Fear Agent. It's hard, because that's his big breakout thing. And it's such an amazing book. But man, Black Science is pretty rad. But yeah, man, I think It's funny, man, and I've been thinking about this during the course of the day, and I actually just caught up to like 8 or 9, I forget, whatever the latest is, what I just finished, and there's some crazy twist in like that second arc, man. That's like he really goes some interesting places, but I don't know, man. I think the cool thing, it's funny, like for me, the thing that always like strikes me about Remender, like he can do that EC Comics, Wally Wood, weird, weird planetary sci-fi. He can kind of probably do that in his sleep. You know, like Remender can nail that stuff. But like, man, what Remender adds, that sense of real human themes of family and loss and like some really touching on some really troubling and difficult stuff and also like wonderful stuff. I mean, that's what really I think that's what makes his book pop. Like that's what makes his books to me like much more resonant. I mean, like the stuff in Black Science and Fear Agent, both center on these family values and these regret and loss and really being honest about some of those things, and he does that stuff so really well and puts it in this what I like to call like popcorn fiction, this great adventurous, fun, rollicking story, but also like maintains the integrity of like having something pretty deeply meaningful to say. And when he's on, man, he is really nailing it.
I think that's spot on the bit about family loss. Actually, I just read the first two. Speaking of Remender, the first two issues of Low today. His one of his newer books just came out, I believe, for Image as well. And just like in Black Science, in the first issue of Low, we have family loss immediately, and he knows how to use emotion, I think, to hook you in and just like push the story forward from the get-go. And it's a really good way to hook you and for you to connect with the story.
One thing I think is an interesting contrast between those two books is Low starts out and you have a very idealized family, and I feel like Remender struggles a little bit to write the idealized family, whereas you look at Fear Agent, and I feel like Black Science is in many ways a spiritual successor to Fear Agent, and he writes these families that, although they care for each other and are real people and love one another, are deeply flawed. And I feel like that's where his real strength is making family feel real, that you can have love, you can have concern, but you also have people that struggle to do the right thing and to actually act well towards one another.
Why do you say you think he struggles with like the idea of family in Low?
Mainly in Low #1, it's the fact that the family's so perfect, like it almost feels like the Brady Bunch a little bit and how happy they are, and I get that sets up the conclusion to Low #1. But it doesn't just work for me the way that something like Fear Agent or Black Science does, where I read it and I really believe those characters and I really invest in them automatically. I think that's also why Low #2 works better than the first issue, because I buy into who these people are a little more, because I can see the flaws and the cracks, and I think Remender writes that really well.
Yeah, I thought one of the draws about Black Science is that the family members and the other members of the team, each one was so fully realized, especially the family members. You only get glimpses of the mother until she later. I'm not spoiling it, but when she shows up later, she's heartbroken. But the teenage daughter is a teenage daughter that argues with her father all the time, but still loves him to death, and he's a very flawed individual that is struggling with his own selfish impulses, and the kid is this very introverted and very quiet, and you kind of start seeing hints of maybe him of breaking out. And I thought that this trade did a really good job of setting all of that up and kind of showing that these characters are about to go on this very emotional arc and be transformed by the end of it.
Yeah. Sorry,
No,
go ahead,
please.
I agree with you, Chase, in the sense that he, in Black Science, as opposed to Low, like he really sort of teases out the flawed nature of a lot of these characters, and they very much wear their problems on their sleeves. It's overt, and I'd say maybe a little on the nose at times. But I mean, it's masterfully done in terms of like how he handles like the dynamics between the different family members in particular. And you don't actually sort of see the mother real, like you get that one little glimpse of the alternate reality version of her, and then there's like the split second where you see her as she, presents the patch, like a little design element for their suits that they're going to be using later. And on a sort of a digression, actually, about that little patch, that the design, the Black Science design, the little circles, the onion, whatever it's called. I'm wagering that is going to be a very important plot point moving forward. You see a little bit of it towards the end when he encounters his monkey stealth, like the monkey version of it, also wearing that patch. But when his wife designs the patch, she says something to the effect of, "Oh, this will be something. It'll be like a symbol of hope throughout the multiverse." And I bet you that we're going to see a lot more of that coming out. One of the things that I've noticed about Remender from both Fear Agent and his work on like Uncanny X-Force, and even stuff in like Uncanny Avengers too, he seeds things really well. He'll drop little hint about something and then not come back to it for like a dozen issues, but when it comes back, man, it just kicks you in the ass. And I was sort of like going through the trade. For me, this was my second time reading through it. I had read it all in issues, and I found myself sort of keeping an eye out for little things that I think might come back again later, because I know they're there, man. They're there somewhere. We just have yet to see how they play themselves out. And also, how many of you guys have actually read the next two issues that follow this trade? Have you guys?
I have.
I have.
Okay, then never mind. I won't go there.
Yeah. No, don't get it. That's a bomb, man.
Yeah. Okay, then never mind. But I think another thing, there's reading this too. It's sort of like I noticed a lot of things that Remender does frequently in his books, and I don't mean this as like a bad thing at all. It's just there is a certain amount of like he has this tendency in a lot of his work to write like a character narration, almost as if like the whichever character it is telling this little sort of parable throughout the issue, and that ongoing narration continues throughout the whole thing, as all of the action, as like the plot is moving forward, and then he ties that story that he's telling almost separately from the action that's happening in generally on like the last page or the second to last page, where it like becomes obvious why that story is being told in that last page, and it just kicks you so hard in the face. Like there's a couple of examples of here, and you can see it in the very first page. Like the narration starts when he says it wasn't until I'd met everyone else's measure of success that I realized I'd failed myself. And then throughout that entire issue, he's just talking about sort of his history and like how he's gone about his life and all that sort of stuff, until the very last page where it's just like boom, right in the face.
That's a narrative method that's actually grown on me in Remender's work, because the first issue, I remember reading it along, and if you just look at Scalera's storytelling, it reads like the opening to Raiders of the Lost Ark, where it's just this action pack. You start and you're just going the entire time, and it's really well narrated just by the images of him going through this adventure, and you can remove pretty much all the words from it, and you have this great action-packed, fantastical journey through this like frog encampment on a turtle's back.
Yeah, how awesome was that, by the way?
That
was an amazing scene to have.
Yeah, but when you read it with his narration, they parallel one another, and I like that because what you're getting is essentially an internal monologue that reads by itself, the images that tell their own story, and typically, like you said, they tie together thematically at the end. I think the best example of that in the first volume of Black Science is Ward, when they're on the reverse Manifest Destiny world, where the Indians are fighting the Germans. And Ward is talking about his dad, and he's thinking about trying to protect people, and then it ends, and he's thinking, he's following through with, why am I'm no better than my dad? This is the way it was always going to end for me. Mm-hmm. And the two tie together really, really well right there at the in those final pages, and it's sort of tragic and beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a very common thing in a lot of his work. Going back to Uncanny X-Force, the narrative-driven. The inner monologues that kind of drive the narrative, but I only think that those work because of how talented the artist he works with. I mean, you mentioned that Raiders of the Lost Ark beginning and seeing that first issue, it throws all of these concepts at you, and he doesn't need to explain them because they're all right there in the art. There's some strange civil war going on, and there's these like cannibalistic frogs with laser tongues and these weird fish people. It's just and he does the same thing when they go to the weird gaseous vessels, the gaseous beings that need a vessel, and I just really admire his both of their penchants to introduce these batshit crazy concepts at you, and you just go with the flow. There's nothing that's confusing about them, and you don't need them to be explained to you. You don't need to be hand-fed explanations for why they exist. They just are that way. And I wanted to ask you, Mike, as a person who writes sci-fi and dabbles in horror and the unexplained, how do you feel about these concepts that he brings up?
I think they're great. I think that's a good way. I think that's why I enjoy Remender's work so much, is that he balances that, fantastical with the very, I guess I can say, like, mundane in a sense. Like, it's mundane. I mean, it's mundane in the sense that everyone goes through it, but it's not mundane to the person who is going through it. Like, every father has, struggles with the ideals of being a father. I think that's one of the great things Remender does. It's like, no matter how much you do for your family, for your kids, if you really are dedicated, you're really committed, you'll always part of you feel like a failure. Like you can never do enough. And I think a lot of that, comes out in his work, which is really powerful stuff. And that's something that a lot of dads, I'm sure, struggle with. But seeing it dramatized and seeing it, balance with these, like you say, the frog world and all these like wonderful, huge, crazy planets and things that he's throwing at you is what makes it all work. Like you can't have really one without the other. And I enjoy that he does. I enjoy that he hammers that stuff home, and you have to use the interiority, I think, to make it work, because like you need, like you said, like on one hand you have the art, you have this Raiders of the Lost Ark, and then you have the interior side of everything that Grant is saying and everything that Grant is doing, and those two balance each other out in a nice harmony. It's hard to do that. It's like this magic trick that he pulls off. And he does it. Captions for me in comics I'm usually conflicted about them when used in certain ways. Like there's one writer who uses the captions a lot. Similar to Remender, but I think it's less effective. For example, this writer will start telling just start telling you things. And when you get to the point where you're telling, it's the old show versus tell, but when you're telling the reader all this stuff that's just like info drops, it takes you out of it, and it's not effective, and it's not the proper way to go about things. Like the interiority of Grant McKay, he's thinking these things because like he's in this situation and he's either dying or thinks he's going to die, or like he's on the run and he's got to save his family, he's got to do all these things, and he's thinking all these things in a panic, and it makes sense. He's not like saying we landed on this weird planet because blah 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 blah. He's not explaining everything that happened, because it's like, why? If he was, it's like, who are you talking to? You wouldn't be thinking of these things. You're explaining it to somebody, that a reader, I guess, but like the sense of verisimilitude then is totally evaporated, because it's like, why are you saying these things? It doesn't make sense. So I mean, his captions work so well because they complement the action, and they really bring home those things that need to be those great character and emotional moments that need to be established. And he does it so well, and it never feels unnatural or out of place.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the way that he uses the captions, like you said, in action sequences in particular, and there's a hell of a lot of them in Black Science, because Matteo Scalera is a beast when it comes to chase scenes, and we can talk about that in a second. But he'll Remender, like, over those scenes that are very fluid, very over this movement, he'll say things that sort of highlight what's happening in that particular moment. Like if he's in a fight, it'll say like, there'll just be a little snippet where he says, "My arm goes dead," like when he just gets like hit in the side, or like when he flips out of the truck in one scene, he's like, "The world tumbles like ass over neck," or something like that. And so it gives sort of like, not really, I guess it is a little bit of sort of an explanation, but it's more of like him, like the character actually relaying those sorts of things, almost as if that character is thinking those things to himself,
Totally.
and that's for a strong suit of Remender's, and he does it really well. Yeah, he does it a lot. And I was going through, actually, I had finished Black Science a little bit early, and I was flipping through Deadly Class too, and I noticed that that's another thing that pops up in some of his works. But it's so effective. Like, it's the fact that he does it so much that it almost doesn't even matter. You know?
I also think that, yeah, and another thing he does is, and this is something I noticed, like, the first thing I wrote of him was Uncanny X-Force, and my favorite X-Men story to this day. Then we have this, we have Low, Deadly Class. He just consistently, over and over again, like, hammers his characters. They rarely get to come up for air, so to speak, is how I kind of think of it. And I think it's a really interesting storytelling technique too, because I feel the same way as the reader. Everything's moving at such a masterful pace that I think he's a really good writer for pace. And that's mirrored in the art here as well. Scalera's art's awesome, as David was saying, in the chase scenes, etc. But like the way he just like hammers his characters over and over again, I think is really effective and powerful as you're reading it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things both the internal monologue and also seeing them in those tense situations manages to do is really manages to humanize these characters that aren't initially likable. If we're looking at Fury Agent with Heath Houston, or we're looking at Grant McKay at the beginning of Black Science, neither of these guys is an incredibly likable human being. Grant McKay is an unfaithful, absent father who's kind of a shitbag to start with. But getting in his head and learning that he does love his children and seeing what he's willing to do when push comes to shove helps me empathize with him in a way that just seeing his initial actions or learning random facts about him wouldn't do. Getting to see his thought process and seeing his emotions set next to his actions is really helpful in making me come to understand these characters that aren't initially likable. And I think that's a theme throughout his work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great complexity, you know. Like, I don't really believe in the whole idea of, like, you know, there's really great noble people out there who just are purely noble. Like, we're humans, we're all selfish and shitty, you know. Like, so, like, you know, I mean, he exaggerates that and enhances that to a really great degree. But like, these guys are just, they're kind of shitty and they're selfish and they do things, you know. They love their kids, but also like, yeah, I'm doing these things for my kids, you know, I want to do it for my kids, but also you're kind of doing it for yourself, you know. And he recognizes that people do things for mixed motivations, you know, and it builds that really great complexity into the characters, what makes it even more endearing, because they share that same thing with you. Is like you know, as mentioned before, they're flawed. You know, they're complex, they're flawed. They're good, but they're also, you know, like I said, they're selfish and weak at times, and that's just how people are. You know, there's no such thing as like pure nobility. I really don't. I don't.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
also brought your kids along on a field trip to an alternative dimension. Like,
Yeah,
nice
right.
job, dude. Yeah, nice job, dude.
Yeah.
Good parenting.
Right.
Yeah.
Should we test it first? Nah.
Yeah. Bring the kids.
Yeah.
That brings up another point I wanted to ask you guys about. The structure of the story, it begins with it begins right there in the middle where they're already stranded on their first world and they're only there for an hour and they lose a person. And then it kind of goes back and introduces you to the beginnings of the experiment, shows you the rivalry that Grant has with his name, Kadir, and then it shows you how they actually got there. And I was wondering what your guys' thoughts were on the structure of the story and if you thought it flowed. So Chase, you review comics. I'm sure you've seen similar things like this. So why don't you tell me?
I talked about this. I reviewed the first issue because I was really impressed with it, and I called it Spielbergian because I talked a lot about Raiders of the Lost Ark and how you dive right into things. You don't pussyfoot around. You don't wait to explain things and make everything nice and neat. You have to have faith in your readers, and I really appreciate that. I think that's something Remender does really well, is that he knows people pick up on things, that his readers are smart, and that's why they're reading comics. That's why they're reading these books. And so he trusts us to understand and to go along with him on the ride. And I think the propulsive action and the momentum he builds in the first issue works really well in pulling it all together. And he really doesn't let up at all. We're 8 issues in, and I've never felt like he or Scalera has pushed on the brakes once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I think that is one of Remender's other strengths as a writer, is the fact that, you know, he doesn't talk down to the reader. And I think that's what all good comics don't do. Just speak down to the reader, and that I think is like the real strength of Black Science is its structure. You know, that there's sort of like an innovative approach to telling the story, and I think that as the book continues and we get deeper and deeper into the story that he's telling, that we'll see a lot more of what's already happened a couple of times and continues to happen in the second 2 issues, which we can't talk about. But like things, he sort of changes the story on a dime. Like everything sort of gets turned on its head really, really quickly. And like you sort of think that you have like an eye on a character, you think you know what they're about, but then in that next issue they'll show something about a character and give you a whole nother light to them, and you'll see sort of the reason why they're acting the way they are, and it gives you like good sort of emotion and an understanding of who these people are, while at the same time structuring the book in that a way that it's never telling you things, it's just sort of showing you these things and giving you a glimpse into these characters' minds while they're constantly running the whole time. And that's what you would do, you know, if you're tossed into this sort of alternative, constantly tossed into these different alternate worlds, you know, with a time limit on being there. And I think that's why Scalera is like such a good fit for this book, and because like he is probably sort of the most like visceral and sort of, I don't even know what the word, like his art just has a velocity to it, almost in the same way that Remender's writing has a velocity to it. There's a speed there, and I think that comes off in every single panel. Like even in just dialogue, you know, there's a way where he sort of shows you like the movement of what's happening rather than just the static image. Everything moves in the book, and that's the structure. You know, the structure is always moving. It's never standing still. You never really understand where you are. You never understand exactly what's going on, and when you do, it changes things just a little bit. And there are lots of these hints at like a bigger world. For example, like in, I think it might even be the first or second issue, where the boss is talking on the phone with somebody, the boss of Block Science, the company that, you know, that he's working for. That hints at like a much larger thing going on there. And so I think there's a lot more twists and turns to come in the future, and I think that's what the book structure is twists and turns, is speed, is velocity. You know?
Mm-hmm. You can do anything with
Totally.
infinite worlds. You know, there's every possibilities on the board. In the art, I think it works so well. I think Dean White is probably my favorite colorist in comics. Dean White can
He's
do
awesome.
anything. He does everything in these few pages. He colors the first world with just so vibrant, with the frog people and the fish people at war, and then it becomes a war comic with in the trenches, and it's so gritty and dark, and you feel muddy, you feel like you're in the rain, and then it shows Ward sneak across, and they find these technologically advanced Indians, and they are so. It's just so vibrant, and it has so much life to it, and I think that goes a long way. I think that you're right, David. I agree with you wholeheartedly about how Matteo, his art is so fluid, and it's so action-packed.
Did he just die for you guys?
Yes.
Yeah.
Not very
Did I die? I'm out. Sorry.
There it is.
No, I was just saying. Yeah, I was just saying. I think it really complements the fluidity of the art, because in how it just always pushes forward. If you're gonna create infinite worlds and you're gonna tell infinite kinds of stories on these different worlds within the same framework of your narrative, I think you having the best colorists in the business can really help you out. You know.
Yeah, and I think one other thing that Scalera and White do really well together is their design elements, because in addition to the high velocity of the story is the fact that one thing I'd recommend for anyone who hasn't tried it is just to take one of these issues and just read it purely on visuals. Just ignore all the words, and you get a very clear sense of what this world they're in and how it functions. They're very good about portraying who's at play, what are the actors, what are the forces here, what's the landscape like, and to giving you a very clear sense of how things function based purely on what you're looking at. good example is the second issue when they jump into the Indians at war with the Germans. They do talk about it, and they're like, oh, this is what's going on. But by the time the group is discussing it, you understand what's happening. You understand that this is a reverse and that there's some sort of sci-fi element in play that's reversed America's history.
Mm-hmm.
I have a quick. Go ahead, Dave.
No, after you, Sam. Go ahead.
Okay, cool. This question for Mike. You mentioned about the Roche limit that you're, wearing a little bit of Remender on your sleeve, and we've chatted a lot about like, how he paces the story, writing, etc. And I was just kind of curious to hear what bits you find are showing up there, and what you take away, and what areas you'd like to emulate, whether it's conscious or not consciously.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. We've already kind of touched on it, in the sense that, like, the great thing about Remender that I find, one of the great things, is that, like, and I think I think it was Chase who mentioned it perfectly, like, he doesn't talk down to the reader. Maybe it was David, but he doesn't. He takes you on this ride, and he really puts a lot of faith in the reader, and that's something I learned. It's especially applicable to sci-fi because there's going to be a lot of gaps, because you're creating a very specific, it's like the specific general. You have this specific world that you have, for my case, the Roche Limit Colony. And unless I give you like a guidebook, like, you're not going to know everything that's like happening, everything that's going on in that world. And it's not necessary, like, my approach is like, okay, I'm going to tell you what you need to know, and the rest of it, kind of don't worry about it. Like, because I know, like, what's essential to the story and what's going to the most compelling parts. And I know that I trust the readers to fill in those gaps and just come along for the journey. And that's just something that Remender does so well. Like, he's always kind of just going and going and going, and relying more on the character beats than the minutia beats. Like, he wants to tell you about this family, about Grant McKay, and why he's a failure, and why he's selfish, and why he's weak, and why he's strong, and his great family, and his great team, and all these different things. Like that issue with what's his name? The guy, the soldier in the trenches, and thinking about his father.
Ward.
That's
Ward.
Yeah, I mean, that was sublime, man. It was sublime. Like, and all you knew what you needed to know, and you filled in the gaps through those emotions and through those beats. And it's so powerful and so wonderful. And like, that is something that, like, really a big cue that I learned from Remender, in terms of, like, take your sci-fi story, take your themes, know what you want to do, know your world, and just go. Like, I never wanted to slow down to be like, okay, well, we're going to talk about, here's what happens in this part of the city, and here's what happens here. Like, I'm not really interested in that, and if I'm not interested, like, I just trust that the reader's not that interested either. Like, maybe there'll be a time where, like, after all is said and done, like, we do, like, some, like, Roche Limit one-shots where it's, like, further exploring the world or something like that. That's just some cool stuff. But, like, for the purposes of, like, telling a tight, emotional, hopefully cerebral story, these are things I feel like were important. That's what's going to be in Roche Limit in these, 15, however many issues. Like, that's what you're going to see, and that's what you're going to get. And I really have faith in the people reading it who are going to get that, and it's going to click with them. And yeah, hardly anybody does it better than Remender.
Yep. Nice.
Well, I wanted to go through and ask you, who is your favorite character and your least favorite character? Chase, what about you?
If I'm allowed to include all 8 issues without going into details, I would say that Kader is probably my favorite character. I don't know if I have a least favorite. The young student who dropped out for him, maybe, but that's only because I haven't gotten a lot of characterization on him, and I'm just not sure who he really is. He's got his tics, but I don't really feel like we've had a chance to dig into his personality yet. But Kader's definitely my favorite.
Okay. David?
I'd say my least favorite is probably Grant, honestly. The character work was phenomenal, but I just think he's kind of a dick. And my favorite was probably, again, because of, like, the later issue, either Kader or Kadir, however you pronounce his name, or again, forgetting his name, the guy who was in charge of security.
Ward.
Ward, yeah.
Yeah. Ward, in that monologue about how both his father and grandfather died in the trenches was just heart wrenching. And that ultimate realization that he too was going to die in a trench was just painful.
What's just so bold about it, just like an aside, like I was reading that and be like, well, he's not going to die. Like, that's not going to happen. And then he died.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and you're tearing my heart out. Yeah.
That's what's great about Rick. A lot of Rick's books is that like it's anyone could die.
He's the characters down. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look at the end of this book. Like the main character is dead.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, the cool thing is, like, and it's not like ever like nihilistic. There's some books that like you say like any character could die. When they die, you're like, they just die to be like shocking or to be like, ooh, the stakes have been raised, and you're like, they're just kind of dead now. But like when Remender kills somebody, man, you like kind of die with them in a sense, like,
it hurts.
it's a really profound death, like, and he's able to do that because he's given you so much before you award in like 2 issues. He establishes what some writers would struggle to do over 10. And when these things happen.
This is a side.
No, go ahead, man.
Did you read? Any of you guys read the Secret Avengers run that he did?
No.
Rick? No. None of you?
No, I've always wanted
God
to.
damn it, man! There's this one issue. Holy shit! It was like the most painful death I've ever seen in a comic. It was Ant-Man. Ant-Man bites it, and the whole thing is like a monologue. This doesn't really ruin too much of the plot, don't worry. But it's like he is trying to save this little baby that they're trying to go for, and he's running through the streets of this like basic robot city. And he is sort of recounting all of the horrible things that he's done in his life and like how down he was on himself as a person because he fucked up so many times. And then like right at the end, he's like, finally I'm doing this great thing. Like I'm going to save this little baby's life. If it's like the one thing that I do in my life will be worth it. And fucking eats it right at the end, man. And it was just so painful. It's like, holy shit. He makes you like fall in love with this character, like you said, like in just a single issue. And someone I had never like heard about. It was like one of the sort of the side Ant-Man's, not like
I'm just shocked to find out Eric O'Grady's dead because I like that character.
Eric O'Grady, that's who it was. Yeah,
and it sounds cooler because if you read that Kirkman Ant-Man run, he is such an awful human being. So
yeah, and that's what it all is about him recounting his horrible life. But like, and you fall in love with him. You're like, it's okay, man. We all fuck up, man. We all fuck up. It's all right. It's all right. You can pick yourself up, and then he dies, and you're like, holy shit. And it was the most that even to this day, I think that single issue is one of the most powerful things by Remender I've ever read in my life.
I think the lesson from Remender is never realize what a shitbag you are and never try to redeem it. And then you won't die.
Start really loving a character.
Yeah.
So, Mike, who did you connect with most reading this series? Which character?
I would say I would also agree with Kadir, however say it. I just thought Grant's pretty close, but something about Kadir, just about how he seems to have so many levels. Like, Grant, what you see is what you get, but Kadir, I'm more curious about the mysteries of him and who he is, because he never seemed like the pure bad guy, the pure antagonist, and that's the kind of character that I like. Coming from the other way around. Grant was like the protagonist who slid backwards. It feels like I like to see Kadir, the antagonist, push himself forward and reveal more of who he is. So I'm looking forward to seeing more of him, and yeah, he's been a cool one for me.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. And Sam, what about you?
Well, we do something a little bit different. I agree that Kadir is probably my favorite character, just because of the last 2 issues after the trade.
Right.
Pretty amazing. The one I'm actually most excited because of the last 2 issues to learn more about and most interested in now is the Indian shaman, because you get a nice little cliffhanger on his character, and it's like you're saying, Dave. This is more overt, but like Remender drops him in the story in the 2nd issue, and then he's just kind of there. And you don't really hear much about him, and then all of a sudden, bam! He becomes somebody you're about to learn about, and I'm really excited to figure out more about that character. So that's what I'm most interested in right now.
Yeah, I forgot about him actually.
It's
I
good they
really
introduced him back. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, no. I mean, I think that's a good point about it, though, is that they kind of just drop him in there subtly, and you forget that he's there, and then all of a sudden, well, I haven't read it, but it seems like he shows up. I know he has that moment in the end where he helps them escape, and I thought that was interesting that they kind of brought him along at gunpoint, and then he's ended up helping them escape, and I thought that was kind of a nice touch. I enjoyed Kadir's character a lot. I really enjoyed it just because he was seemed so vulnerable, you know. He was so vulnerable in his envy and his hate when he's laying on that girl's lap. I forget her name.
Blonde hair.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and see, I was kind of a misstep of that. She was like developed as this lackey, you know, and they kind of hinted that there was something behind it, and then she gets this like ghost spirit sucked up in her, and so I'm interested to see what happens there. And I hope that there's some like duality there because she seemed pretty interesting, and I would like it not to be like another way for them to replace her with like Monkey Grant, you know. But I really enjoyed Grant's character the most because that first issue and the subsequent issues just hammered in as a father and as a husband and as someone who's made mistakes. You know, it's just so easy to fall into that pity cycle where you're like, oh, woe is me, but he's falling in this pity as he is saving lives, and he's finding a way to be a better man, and he's recognizing, like, you know what, I have problems, but
Hey Dave, something's up with your mic. Heads up.
he has a way to I just felt like he really connected with me, not just as a main character. I thought it was a great setup that they show him pushing everything through, and then all of a sudden he dies. But I just really enjoyed that plight that he has, that he recognizes that he's a piece of shit, but he's so duplicitous about it. He's just so open to continuing down that path and just saying, well, I am a bad person, but I'm trying to be good. But he doesn't, you know. It's just a very human aspect. So I really enjoyed that aspect of the character.
What do you know? The two real life fathers are the ones who are most interested in Grant McKay. I think it's kind of interesting, actually. Maybe able to relate a bit more, which is very understandable.
Yeah, well, it's like I said, I think that's the great thing that Remender always, and it was existed in Fear Agent as well. You know, that idea, like, you're never ever, once you become a father, you're never going to be enough. You are never ever going to be enough for your kids, for your spouse. You just won't. You know, you'll always have a sense of like failure hanging over you because you want so much, and you'll never be able to deliver what your hopes and dreams are for your kids. I mean, you can probably can't deliver them to yourself, and there becomes just like this wide gap within yourself of like of wanting these things and not being able to give them total security, total happiness. You know, you can't, and if you're cognizant of that, then you have feelings of failure, you know, and that's difficult to reconcile. And no matter how much you maybe tell yourself like, well, these are impossible or whatever, it's you can't self-justify that kind of stuff, and that's challenging to deal with. And I think Remender gets that really, really well, and he's a father as well, from what I understand.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's a good a spot as any to wrap up. David's having technical difficulties, and I know some of us have familial duties to go take care of. So let's just do some quick closing thoughts. Chase, from you?
Just in general, I enjoyed the conversations. Actually got me more engaged with Black Science. Like I said, I think it's a spiritual successor to Fear Agent. You see a lot of the same themes in terms of destiny, repetition of actions, and also the idea of people who are deeply flawed being able to do good things and become noble out of love despite their flawed selves. So I'm excited to see where it goes and to explore more of these characters.
Cool. And Mike?
Yeah, I mean, Chase basically just described what I'm trying to do with Roche Limit, so yeah, that's good. No, I mean, I love that, you know, these ideas of redemption and being flawed, and I think that's a very powerful human story. I think that's something that we all endure in some way. Like being flawed, coming to reconcile our flaws and find redemption, find ways to better yourself, and bettering yourself is a challenging road, because you often can slide deeper into your own flaws. Becomes kind of inherent into making things better as well, and it's a tough duality. And Black Science does it well, Fear Agent did it well, even Deadly Class does it well. And that's something like hopefully I'm touching on as well and comes across in Roche Limit. I love those ideas, and I think like I said, I think it's a really powerful human story that a lot of us understand.
Mm-hmm. And Sam?
All right, I got 3 things to say. All the things we talked about, I agree. Nice and deep, and have a lot of meaning. It's also a really fun story. If you just want to have an awesome time reading something that it kind of is like a movie and gets you hooked in, and you just don't want to put down, Black Science is awesome. 2, I want to say everybody go pick up Roche Limit next week. I know I will. From those who have read it, I heard it's really, really good, and I can't wait to pick it up myself. And I also want to say thanks for coming on today, Mike. I really appreciate you and taking the time to join us.
Oh no, thanks for having me. This is a blast. I'm really, really thrilled to be here. This is great. So thank you guys so much. And David, I don't know if you can hear me. Thanks for thanks for the review, and thanks for everything you've done so far. I appreciate it. All you guys, thank you a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. Well, I think that about does it. Thank you, Chase, as well. Chase Magnett of comicbook.com and Legends and Comics and Coffee in Omaha, Nebraska. Roche Limit next week. Hopefully your shop ordered enough copies. I am really excited for this meeting. It was great discussion. Thanks for everyone coming out once again, and we will see you next week.
Yep. What are we reading next week?
Next week we are reading, not Nowhere Men, we're reading Six Gun Gorilla.
Cool.
By Cy Spurrier, so that should be fun. Yeah. All right, so thanks again for coming out. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.